before we get started with the presentation, maybe we should just go around and introduce who our presenters are this morning. So Amrita, we'll just go in order of how they are on the screen.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I'm Amrita Perman. I'm the Dean of Career Education and Workforce Development at the San Diego Community College District. So I work across our 4 institutions: San Diego City, Mesa, Miramar College, and San Diego College of Continuing Education. I'm glad to be here with you all.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Deneen Brown. I am the Regional Consortium Chair for San Diego and Imperial Counties.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Tina Gilbartel, and I'm the Director of the Region's Center of Excellence for Labor Market Research.
Thank you all very much. And a special thanks to Molly Ash, who kept us on task and really got us to the finish line here in terms of getting our presentation together. We have a lot of information to present this morning. Please ask questions when given the opportunity and put them in the chat. But please know we're also going to make, I believe, this slide deck available to all of you, so that really, as we were preparing it, I found it to be, or the end result to be, something you can do as a nice research tool, if you will, or reference tool to help you to develop your career education at your institutions. So with that said, I am going to, or you can take a look at the agenda here. Maybe I'll just walk through that, then turn it over to Deneen. Here's our agenda for today, and really pretty much what the content of the presentation is, starting with Ed Code and Title V. I'm sure you're familiar with as well, AB 1725. We'll go into that in detail. And that all leads to the Program and Course Approval Handbook, better known as, affectionately known as the PACA. We'll take a 5-minute break. Then we'll come back, and Tina will be speaking to local and regional curriculum process and LMI. We'll take another break, and then I'll be at the finish line with advisory committees and the biennial CE program review. So that's what I meant by cradle to grave. We're going to start with getting your curriculum developed, and then right on through how to maintain it and how we report it to our local boards to ensure we're doing what's in the best interest of our students. So thank you again, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Deneen.
Thanks, Al. So I will get us started with the really, really fun stuff, Ed Code and Title V, which really dictates all of the things that we do in community college, but sometimes it gets a little bit confusing. So Ed Code is the big one. That is the one that tells us what we can and cannot do. And it is considered law because it comes out of legislation for the state of California. And it always supersedes Title V. And then I'm going to get into AB 1725, but AB 1725 amended the original governance structure that was outlined in the Education Code. And if you're ever having a sleepless night and want to read the section that applies to community college, it's Title III and it's Division 7, and is riveting reading, I can tell you that. Now, Title V is also referred to as the California Code of Regulations. And this is created and approved by the Board of Governors. And the Board of Governors, as you know, is the members of the Board of Governors are appointed by the governor of the state. And everything that the Board of Governors does with regard to Title V is based on Ed Code. And if you are interested in looking at the section that applies to community colleges for Title V, it is Section 6. And really, I do make a joke of it, but if you do ever have an opportunity to kind of just look through it, it is really interesting to see how they delineate the different sections, and really how everything we do is based on Title V and Ed Code. And then, of course, Title V, like Ed Code, is like a law that we have to follow, that we're required to follow. Now, AB 1725 is the legislation that changed community colleges. It was signed by the governor in 1988, and it became effective in 1989. And it was, as you can see, a unanimous, by the legislators, a unanimous agreement that these changes were important to improve community colleges. So what did AB 1725 do? Because everybody always refers to AB 1725. We're talking about 10+1, or we're talking about governance, any of those things, where everybody refers to AB 1725. But I don't know if everybody really understands exactly what AB 1725 addresses. So so these are the things, these are the key things. And of course you can go in and read it. I can always send you the link to the official legislation, but it really established the community colleges as a segment of California higher education. As you know, before we kind of came out of the K-12 system. And so this really separated us and put us into that higher education category. It also defined our mission. And that mission really set the tone for how community colleges are going to operate and the priorities for us. And then the local and governance, system governance relationship. And then there was a lot of things regarding funding that were put into AB 1725 that were really put in there to encourage quality and increase the standards of community college. So this is where they put in the 75% credit hours being taught by full-time faculty, that 75-25 regulation or rule. And then these are just a couple of other things that they put in there, but really important things that we deal with on a daily basis or affect our daily work. But this was where they got rid of the lifetime credential. Some faculty still have that lifetime credential, but they eliminated the lifetime credential. They came up with the minimum qualifications and hiring criteria for faculty. And then faculty service areas, those were established. They also set the tenure for faculty to 4 years. They required that there be a faculty evaluation process and that process had a peer review component. They also established for administrators to have retreat rights to go back into faculty if under certain requirements, of course. They also established staff development, and they set diversity goals. And I will also say with AB 1725, it wasn't just faculty. It addressed faculty, administrators, and staff. Oftentimes people think it's just faculty, but no, it was all three. So the intent of AB 1725, like I mentioned before, was really to increase or to establish community college as a higher education and give it more clout and credence and its image. And then with the support of more money to improve the quality, move away from higher education, develop a more unified system, and then institutional renewal. So what does AB 1725 say? So the Board of Governors, as I stated, through Title V, they're the ones that provide our regulation. It established what they call the minimum standards, and that local boards have to establish procedures. And I love this because this is totally legislative Chancellor's Office kind of language, not inconsistent, right? Like, what does that mean? Does that mean consistent, but not inconsistent with the standards? And this is to ensure that faculty, staff, and students have the right to participate effectively in the governance of the colleges and the districts. And then also gave Academic Senate the right to assume primary responsibilities for recommendations for curriculum and academic standards. And if I put the references on here, so if you would want to go and see that, you can. But really, this was a huge thing that happened, especially when we talk about participative governance or shared governance. This is really where it came from. So what does effective participation mean? So AB 1725 established that we have to have not inconsistent ways of governance, but in Title V is where effective participation is defined. So participating effectively in the district or college governance, it's a shared decision-making process. But it doesn't imply total agreement. So it doesn't mean that everybody has to agree. Everybody has to have the same, not everyone has to have the same level of involvement, but they have to have the ability to participate. And then, of course, as we know, all decisions rest with the local boards. With regard to academic senate, the AB 1725 required that the districts establish policies for academic senate to participate, and providing a minimum of governing board or designee. So AB 1725 established that the academic senate, when adopting policies and procedures, that the districts would establish, delineate academic and professional matters. And these are the areas, academic and professional matters. And these are also referred to as the 10+1. So the 10+1 these are the areas in which faculty have purview and can provide recommendations to the board for final approval. So I'll just wait here for a second and let you see these if you have never seen them before. But like I said before, these are what we refer to as the 10+1, where faculty have purview for recommendation to the board. And there will not be a quiz on this. There will be a little quiz, but it will not be on this. And like I said, there's so many things in AB 1725, but one of the other things that was in there is that the colleges were required to create a curriculum committee, and that the committee has to be established under mutual agreement of administration and the academic senate. And then, like I mentioned before, there's also provisions for administrators, staff, and students. And then I thought that this was, of course you can't read it, but I thought that this was really a nice way that delineated how the law impacted the different areas. And you'll get this slide deck, and you'll be able to read it. But it's really nice. I think it's a nice little way of depicting how AB 1725 states where and how the different participatory governance groups should have purview and should be participating. So with that, I believe I am turning it over to Amrita.
When I first got here, people were always saying, oh, check the PCAW. And I thought, what on earth is that? It turns out it's a really important document. So I'm going to try to dive in here and share a little bit about what the Program and Course Approval Handbook actually does for us. Okay, so the Program and Course Approval Handbook, the PCAW, really provides the California Community College system with guidelines and instructions for the submission of the curriculum for approval, chaptering, and maintenance, right? The Chancellor's Office is required to prepare and distribute this handbook. And since the first publication, I think we're on our 7th edition now, there's been a number of different updates. And the most recent one was in November 2019. And there were a number of specific changes related to CTE in that. And so that's what we're going to really focus on. The Program Course Approval Handbook covers everything under the sun, but we, of course, are really tailoring this information to the CTE world. What's important to know is that every time a new edition comes out, it supersedes the preceding editions, right? So if the new one says all program and course approval submissions have to be done in pink font, you got to do it in pink font or it doesn't count. So what's in this book is very important. So the handbook is organized into two major components with three segments within each component, right? So the first component is all about credit curriculum, and the second one is all about non-credit curriculum. And in each section, it includes an introduction, an overview, and is then followed by more specific information about course, program, criteria, and standards. So really the specifics of what makes, say, for example, a certificate of achievement for CTE actually a certificate of achievement versus a CTE AA degree. So the 7th edition has three notable changes impacting career education. And the first one is that all new career education degree proposals submitted must include a narrative addressing these 7 elements. And so I'm not going to read each one of them, but again, these slides, be prepared. They're about to get very wordy, but the idea here is that you can use this whole slide deck, as Al mentioned in the beginning, as a reference tool. So I'm not going to read every single letter on the screen here, but you get a sense of the 7 major components of that. Number 2, so currently our colleges are required to submit labor market information to their boards of trustees for any new career education degree or certificate. And now the colleges must also provide the following additional information to the board for all new and modified career education programs. And 3, in recent years, we used to be able to submit sort of a condensed version of a narrative that really just focused on goals and objectives, catalog description, and program requirements. But now all the new and modified degree and certificate proposals submitted to the Chancellor's Office have to include additional narrative content. So you can see all 7 elements here. So it's not just the goals and the basics, but it's also addressing issues of duplication, as well as appropriate sort of projections around completer and transfer information. And this, you'll start to see a theme here with the new edition, so it's really getting to the goals of CTE, right? As we build CTE programs, we're really focused on getting the completers into jobs. And so we're starting to really look at all the ed code requirements and PCAWS aligning to them when it says, you know, for ed code, and I will talk about this later when it comes to our biennial review, but really ensuring that there's no duplication, that their programs are judged on completion and employment, right? So are they getting the jobs? And so you'll start to see that the narratives are requiring that information. So those are the 3 main overall changes. And I'm going to move into sort of the specific standards and required documentation for the CTE degrees and certificates. And again, these slides are a little hefty, but I won't read every single one element on it. So first, for CTE associate degree standards, all CTE associate degrees classified as CTE, whether there's an AA or an AS, must meet the following 8 baseline elements, right? So these are baseline requirements that really say, okay, if you meet this, then it is an AA or an AS. And I'll just let you see those. Obviously, the vocational top code is key, right? That tells us that it is a CTE. And then, of course, this regional consortium recommendation, and we'll have a whole section on that process later. So again, I'm not going to read through all of this slide, but it is meant to really be a reference, high-level summary of what you can see. So this is really all about the documentation required to show that you have met those 7 elements, right? So the full narrative components we described, not just the summarized sort of condensed version we used to be able to submit, and then the elements at the bottom of the screen. And again, you can start to see a theme here, right? We're going to start to see the labor market information, advisory committee recommendations, so key to informing all of our CTE programs, right, as our core advisory committees. And we have a section on that later today. And then, of course, the regional consortia recommendation. For CTE certificates of achievement, this is the required documentation, and it's essentially the same, but a really important critical element here is that this is required for both new and revised certificates of achievement. So the required documentation for the associate's degree is just for new, but when it comes to revised certificates of achievement, the 7th edition of the PCAW requires that this is also submitted. And again, I want to emphasize the labor market information and the consortia recommendation. So even with modified programs. And also there's details in both, I believe, Ed Code as well as in the program course, as in the PCAW, that emphasize the importance of new up-to-date labor market information. We'll talk a little bit about that. We have a whole section on what labor market information is. And you know, this new requirement as of November 2019 is a challenging one in that it takes a lot of additional paperwork and steps when we do the modifications. So that's sort of the core elements of what's required, what the standards are, and what's required. And again, these are just summary slides. If you are really excited about this content, you can read the whole PCAW, which you probably should do at some point. But these slides give you a good reference check. And then if you have detailed questions, you can go to the specific pages that they are from. So the second part of the PCAW is all about the non-credit career development and college preparation, or the CDCP. And there's two different kinds of certificates that they go over in terms of requirements: their certificate of competency and their certificate of completion. And I will note here that the PCAW defines the certificate of completion as a certificate leading to improved employability or job opportunities. And then the certificate of competency as a certificate in a recognized career field articulated with a degree applicable coursework, and completion of an associate's degree or transfer to a baccalaureate institute. So for the certificate of competency, this is the required documentation. And again, you see some familiar things in terms of the narrative, the course outline of records, and the labor market information. Notably, though, the regional consortial approval is not required for these non-credit certificates. So for the certificate of completions, the requirements are exactly the same. We just wanted to duplicate it because we thought it'd be helpful again in the future as you reference these slides if you have additional questions. So this next slide is difficult to read, I think, but it is sort of a handy reference guide as you know, if you go back to these slides, to just kind of get a sense of the like a high level summary of what documents are needed for each of these program types and their goals. And so you can see the CTE ones listed there under the goal and the elements that we've discussed. And so that is really a simple glimpse into the PCAW and what it tells us to do. And so, you know, I will say that when I first started, I was handed this PCAW and told that, you know, I need to pay attention. It's going to guide everything I do. And I, of course, put it down and didn't read it until suddenly I didn't know what was required for different things. So now I'm much more familiar with it. And I certainly encourage you to take some time, but do hope that the summary section is helpful in terms of basic reference. And so now we're going to try another Menti. Hopefully it goes a little bit better than last time. And that's that for the PCAW.
Okay. All right. Anybody can join in the midway since we have a few questions. So let's get started here. Again, let's answer quickly. Oh goodness, I hear background noise again. Which legislative bill established the local system governance relationships for the California community colleges? Is it AB 1776, AB 1985, or AB 1725? Awesome, good job, everybody. So Deneen presented on AB 1725. All right, next question. All right, everyone, the next question is, which of the following was not the intent of AB 1725? Enhance community college image, increase support for more community college funding, or combine K-12 and community college into one system? You have 5 seconds. Awesome. So you're right. The right answer is that we did not, the intent of it was not to combine K-12 and community colleges. All right, next question. Which of the following were established with AB 1725? Look at your phones. The font here is very small, so please look at your phones if you can, or your browser. The first one is faculty, staff, and students all participate in district and college governance. Academic Senate has the primary responsibility for making recommendations in curriculum. The creation of minimum qualifications, local hiring criteria, faculty service areas. All of the above or none of the above? All right, time's up. All of the above, you're correct. Okay. All right, now we're going to Amrita section. So what does the PCAW stand for? Parrots, carrots, and hamsters, People's Collaborative for Awesome Hats, or the Program and Course Approval Handbook? And I really appreciate everybody smiling about the responses here because PCAW does really sound like a parrot. Thanks, Amrita, for putting together this question. All right, time's up. It is the Program and Course Approval Handbook. I do like whoever put People's Collaborative for Awesome Hats. I think that would be a really cool thing as well. All right, next question related to the
That person
PCAW.
needs to read the whole PCAW.
All right, if you answer quickly, then you get more points. Do certificate program modifications require a regional recommendation? Yes or no? All right, time's up. Yes, it does. So program modifications also require a regional recommendation. All right, last question for this section. Evidence of advisory committee endorsement for program development and modification is required. Is this true or false? Okay, you have 5 seconds to answer, the last couple of people. And it's true, we do need to have evidence of committee endorsement. I believe, Amrita, correct me if I'm wrong, that's usually in the form of meeting minutes or other types of endorsement.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. All right, everyone, let's see what this looks like. We have the results. All right, for everybody who put in their pseudonyms or names, this is the point. And you can see who is the fastest one. Whoever is Heartstorm, you are the fastest respondent and with the most score. Congratulations on our quiz.
So we are going on to our next section, all about the regional program recommendation process and the labor market information, which are very, very closely tied together. And so this is a multi-part section that we will walk you through. And I will say, the regional recommendation process is essential, right? Not just because without it, you won't meet the PCAW requirements, but also because it really speaks to the regional collegiality of CTE program development and the regional approach to workforce development that we all participate in. We as CTE leads in our institutions get together regularly to talk about CTE programs to meet workforce demand in our region. And, there are, of course, discipline meetings that occur across institutions, but I would say the CTE world is one in which cross-institutional collaboration is very, very strong. And I think our regional recommendation process really speaks to that, as does the regional recommendation leadership. Deneen and her whole crew really sort of uplifts all the work that we do together and helps us stay connected and really focused on getting our students to work. So let's see what we've got here. Okay, so one first thing I wanted to say is that we've been redoing kind of how the regional recommendation process appears on the myworkforceconnection.org website, which is the primary regional website for all of the regional work, so for the regional consortium. And the myworkforceconnection.org provides a lot of different resources for you. All the slides that are being shared today, all the resources that will be up there, and you can go to sort of this little section here and find the actual regional recommendations section. So you can see how that works. And at the top, you'll see there's some really great quick links and some really useful elements that you and your institutional colleagues will need to sort of make this a successful process. So there are really 4 stages to the regional recommendation process. The big one that we're all always asking about, right, is the official section, right, when we actually get things recommended. But before we get there, we want to walk you through the ideal 4 stages to the full process. So we really start with our concept development, and that's all about program idea generation, right? So when we come up with the program we want to design, and this normally begins with a business or an advisory board member, right? An industry expert working with faculty that recommends that we should, that there's an industry need and we need a program to support that workforce challenge, right? And so it's all about that idea, the bright light, right? But we can't just create a program on a good idea. We do need to ensure that it connects to available jobs and actually meets employer needs. And there's many different elements, right, that the PCAW tells us about that we've kind of covered, right, and that Ed Code emphasizes in terms of the importance of really showing that need, right? So it's all about the use of labor market information, and not just any labor market information, but labor market information that's most closely associated with applicable SOC codes that are tied to local regional needs, right? So that analysis really looks at the available jobs within the local service area for completers. So with design, we try to design with the job in mind, right? So again, we ground that good idea generation with the workforce need. And this is where we look to our labor market information. And ideally, we do this as early as possible in the whole idea generation process, right? So that we're really utilizing the data in the beginning of the process to inform the design rather than at the end to just justify the program. So this brings me to the second step in the regional process, which is the actual labor market information request. And again, this is basically a demand and supply analysis, or the supply gap analysis, which really demonstrates need. And here I'm going to turn it over to one of my favorite regional leaders, Tina Nobartel. As was stated earlier, she's the director of our Region Center of Excellence, which is our source, your source for the labor market information. So Tina, take it away. I'm going to unshare. Or try to unshare.
There we go. There you go. Thanks, Amrita. So as Amrita mentioned, everything that we do for the labor market information is really specific to the PCAW. The PCAW talks about how there has to be an occupation that we train for, and there has to be some kind of a needs assessment. So before you can get that needs assessment, a career education dean must submit an online LMI request to the Centers of Excellence for Labor Market Research, and will conduct a report specifically indicating whether or not there's a supply gap for the occupation or occupations to be trained. It doesn't have to necessarily only be the career education dean. The requester, if the requester is a faculty member, administrator, and so forth, then the requester must at minimum notify the designated CE dean at their campus. We specifically put that question in the online form, so that way you'd be able to ensure that the CE dean was notified. And this step is very important because the CE dean is the one that represents the college at the Dean's Council when we do go through the regional program recommendation process. I've included a link to the online LMI request form in the slides. It's also in the actual site itself. So Amrita showed it earlier, but if you go to our Workforce Connection site and you click on the little hamburger menu here and you go to program recommendations, you'll see the quick links at the top, and the LMI link will be up there as well. Okay, moving forward. So before you even submit an online LMI request, there are some information that you need to gather to ensure that the request runs pretty smoothly. So the first thing you're going to want to find out is, what occupation are you training for? Every company has a different name for an occupation. They might have a different job title. So keep the job title you have in mind and go to ONET Online. If you go to onetonline.org, you'll be able to find a quick search up here and type in that keyword that you're thinking about or that job title. It will populate a list for you with all of the SOC or standard occupational classification codes that are related to the job that you want to train for. So use the ONET Online to help identify what those occupational codes are. They're normally called SOC or SOC in labor market information. The next information that you're going to want to prepare for the LMI data request form is a 6-digit top code for the proposed program. If you go to the top manual from the Chancellor's office, you'll see that in the top manual, there's a lot of top codes with an asterisk, and that will indicate whether or not it's a CTE or career education program. If you're not familiar with the top manual, it looks something like this. It's a bit outdated. They've refreshed it a couple of times, but if you just Google top CCCO, as in the California Community College's Chancellor's office, you should be able to find this relatively easily. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so those are the first two things that you're going to want to make sure that you prepare. What are the occupations and what is the top code for the program that you plan to train for? Then you'll get the information, provide us with your contact information so that we can reach out to you and clarify any questions that we might have. And if you have additional research, for example, you've done some secondary research or lit review on the topic, feel free to share that with us as well, because we'll include it in the report if it's related. All right, so moving forward here. So Amrita mentioned that we'll look at demand and supply. So when I think about labor market research, it's basically market research. What is the demand for labor? And what is the supply that the educational institutions are awarding or generating in order to meet that employer demand? So to understand how the LMI works in the regional program recommendation process, you'll have to know how demand and supply works. So for demand, the way we calculate demand is by annual job openings. And the way I like to describe annual job openings is butts in a seat in a classroom. So let's say we have an entire economy and there are only 6 jobs available. You'll see in the colored seats here that 4 of those jobs are filled. There are 2 empty seats or 2 jobs that are unfilled. So the annual job openings for the year would be 2 annual job openings in this case. So whenever you look at our reports and you see total employment or total jobs, please keep in mind that's the total number of jobs that are available, but the total number of jobs in the region, but the ones that employers are trying to hire for are the job openings themselves. Okay. So in addition to demand, we have to also look at supply. So the way we look at supply in labor market research is the number of awards. basically the number of certificates and degrees that a college confers or an institution confers. The way we identify which courses or programs, which programs have an award for a particular occupation is through this type of triangulation here. So as I mentioned earlier, when you provide us with an occupational code or SOC code using onet.org, we will link that up with a top code. There's a crosswalk that determines, okay, for every SOC code, there is a top code that's related to it. And that will help us determine all the community college programs that have an award related to that occupation. The third step that we do is we look at all of the SIP codes. And SIP codes are basically a code designated to a program that's not from a community college. So we are the only post-secondary institution that uses top codes, the California community colleges, and every other institution or organization uses SIP codes to identify their programs. So that's why the COE, our team, does this kind of combination of the three codes in order to find your demand and supply. I always get asked a lot, where does demand and supply come from, the data? So this is a reference to where it is, but to just basically give you an overview, essentially on the demand side, a lot of our data comes from survey responses from employers and workers that are submitted to the Employment Development Department. They have a LMI or Labor Market Information Division that collects all the statistical information, and then they share it to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Every state has some kind of LMI statistical agency that collects employment data. That's where you hear a lot about the national trends and national information on the labor market. They send it over to the BLS, and so they aggregate all of that. So just keep in mind, this is reported information that we're looking at. And of course, there's some limitation because there is some lag between when the data gets sent to EDD, they analyze it, they send it to the BLS. But we take that information and then we aggregate it through our various tools, and we look at something called a demand table. So that's how we look at demand. On the supply side, there are two different sources of data sets. So you're probably most familiar with the California Community College's MIS Data Mart, and that uses top codes. So for every college, they will have a top code assigned to a program, and based on that program, that data will be sent up to the chancellor's office. So you'll see a lot of that data in the launch board and MIS itself. The other database that we submit data to is IPEDS. So the community colleges and other institutions submit to IPEDS, which is basically a national clearinghouse for data on programs. And so we take that information and we put it into a supply table for our organization. So that's how we look at demand and supply. We create tables and data sets using all of these sources. And then we create our reports. So as I mentioned, our data is limited based on what people actually report. So if people are using wrong codes or they're reporting under wrong occupations on this side, then our reports might end up being a little bit inaccurate, right? So in order to fix that or actually address that, we do a lot of regional employer surveys. So our team tries as much as possible, depending on resources and bandwidth and timelines. If we can get data from employers, we would convene a small group of employers and survey them or host a focus group. So that was very quick, but essentially this is where all of the data comes from. Again, it's reported information. So whatever is reported is what we take a look at. Okay, so now that you know where the data comes from, what kind of brief is used in the regional program recommendation process? Well, the data that we put together will look something like this. This is going to be the report highlights. And the COE, we have a rubric on how we rate whether or not we recommend that we should proceed as a region with a new program, proceed with caution, meaning if you decide to proceed, just keep in mind these things, or do not proceed, which is a red dot. And that's based on whether or not there's a supply gap or if the occupation actually pays a living wage. So what I'm sharing with you here is a screenshot of one of our most recent reports. So as you can see, for property, real estate, and community association managers, there's supply gap in the region. The occupation pays at or above the living wage. There are a lot of institutions that provide a related training program, but there's also a lot of annual openings for this occupation. And the expected education level for a lot of these positions is a high school diploma or equivalent. So we give this high level snapshot to help the deans take a quick look at, okay, what does the information look like as I'm going to go through the report? So in each report, we're going to provide an overview of what the occupation is. So again, this is why that occupational code is so important, that SOC code, because it'll tell you what other job titles does this occupation fall under. As I mentioned, not everybody titles things the same way. So one company might call this position a property manager, a different company might call it an apartment manager, another company might call it a resident manager. But to gather data, you have to consolidate all of these varying titles and these little small sample sizes into a larger sample, which is why that SOC code is so important, because we can actually get data from a larger sample if we aggregate that information from all these various job titles. In the report, we'll also look for demand. So as I mentioned earlier, demand is different than total employment. So we try to make it clear in our reports what's demand and what's employment in general. So you can see for this particular occupation, this example, that employment for the occupation has grown over the past few years. And if you look at labor market demand for the total employment, there have been 418 annual job openings projected for the next few years. So this is what we're looking for demand. But just looking at this trend here, it looks pretty promising because this occupation has grown. The other thing that we're going to include in the reports is whether or not these occupation we're training for provides a living wage to entry-level workers. So you'll see a graph like this in all of our reports for the regional program recommendation process. It has a range of occupations. And what you're looking for is each of these percentiles are different levels of wages. So if you have no background in terms of work experience and so forth, you'll probably make around $14.73 for this occupation. But if you have some additional training and experience, which a lot of our community college students will have because they're going through a training program, they will most likely make at the 25th percentile, which is $22.44. And if you keep going on with more education and experience, you can see that the wages increase, right? So the 25th percentile here for this occupation is very important to look at because it's above the living wage for San Diego County. So in San Diego County, for one single adult to make it here, bare minimum, maybe they have roommates, they're using public transportation, they're just surviving, no entertainment and all of that, it's gonna be $15.99. So we try as much as possible to encourage colleges to move forward with programs that have the 25th percentile at or above that living wage. And as you can see, even $15.99 is still pretty low in my opinion, but the data shows that this is the bare minimum that somebody needs to make. All right, so we talked about demand and then we talked about living wages. The other thing our reports show is there even a supply gap? Do we produce fewer awards than there are actually job openings in the region for this occupation or occupations? So using this crosswalk again, matching up the codes, we do a demand and supply analysis. So on the demand side, I shared earlier that it was 1418. On the supply side, if we look at every single award that the colleges have reported that they had completers for, or excuse me, awards for, then we add that number up and we get 140 awards between the years of, excuse me, oh, it's hopping around. There you go. Between the years of program 14, 15, 16, 17, and 16, 17 to 18, 19. So the awards for institutions outside of California are a little lagged. So you can see that the years are a little bit lagged. But for California, all of our programs are at the most recent time of this data set was 16, 17 to 18, 19. So we add up all these numbers, we'll get 114 awards for the region for non-community college and community college institutions. And when you add that, and when you just basically do a subtraction, you'll see that there are 278 job openings that are not being filled every year because we're not producing enough folks for this particular occupation. Our team also tries to give you comparative information. So just doing the same analysis in terms of demand for the state and the supply across the state of California, you'll see that there are 3,800 positions across the state of California that are being unfilled every year. So that's why this is one of the occupations that our center recommends to move forward with because of that huge supply gap. All right, so if the region doesn't even have a program and this data set here is left blank, how do we even know that the new program will do well? So another section that we include in the report is student outcomes data. And you can find this in the Chancellor's Office launch board. So for the position, property managers, real estate managers, and so forth, the most related top code to the occupation is real estate. And if you look at the real estate top code and you look at all the programs across the state, you'll see that 60% of them earned a living wage compared to all career education programs in general. In San Diego Imperial, that number is about the same. And then when you look at the percentage of jobs who reported that they got a job closely related to their field of study in real estate, you'll see that statewide only 61% compared to 72% of all career ed programs in general. Same thing with San Diego Imperial. So I like to take a look at these to take an indicator to see if students even got a living wage from other related programs if a program doesn't currently exist in our region. That's why we include this information in the reports to give you that kind of regional as well as statewide analysis. All right, what else can you find on Labor Market Brief? Well, we have a lot of data sets, so I'm going to quickly go through them, but all of our reports have all of these graphs that I'm just sharing with you. The first one, that's other information not related to the regional program recommendation process necessarily, but it's good for discussion, especially if folks are planning their curriculum. We look at online job postings, just how frequently are employers posting for this job. And you can see here over time, in the past 3 years, there's a lot of people posting for this. Don't mistake this as demand. It's not demand necessarily because one position can be posted multiple times. And so the frequency really indicates more that maybe they're having difficulty filling the position, for example, or other issues going on in the economy. Other data that we provide for you is a number of the types of employers that post for this position. So for this particular occupation, property, real estate, and community association managers, these are the top 10 employers. What I like to do with this data is I like to reach out to them and ask for a number of things. Would they like to sit on an advisory committee for the program? If I had one already, could they tell me a little bit more or maybe engage them in other ways? Employer engagement is huge. And so we provide this list for you in order for you to have a starting point of how to engage with employers. We also provide the educational attainment for the occupation. So for this particular occupation, you can see that while there are few people with bachelor's degrees and above, you can see that the majority of folks have an associate degree or less. So again, another reason why we think this is such a great fit for the community colleges. And then we provide a list of all of the soft, specialized, and software skills that employers post on their website for this occupation. And then finally, the top certifications. These are third-party certifications or certifications, recognized certifications in the job postings. I know I went through that quickly, but essentially I just wanted to let you know what's in each of these reports because there's a lot of information and I think it's a good resource. On our website for the regional program recommendation process, there's also a lot of Q&A, of frequently asked questions. So if you click on any one of the plus signs on the website, you'll be able to find answers to some of these questions. For example, what if the LMI already exists? If you click on that, it will take you to our list of reports and you'll be able to find our existing reports. I'm not going to go through all of these for the interest of time, but I just wanted to let you know that the frequently asked questions are available on our webpage. If the LMI doesn't support the recommendation for a new program because that occupation doesn't have a supply gap, there is something called an employer endorsement letter template that the regional consortium provides. And it'll look something like this. And it will include a template asking for information that pretty much is almost equivalent to what a labor market brief would have. So I explained earlier about the demand, supply, and a supply gap, the wages. Here it describes by an employer that here I, from whatever employer, supports this program, and these are the occupations that this program will train for. The people who work in these occupations can expect to earn between whatever wages in entry-level positions, and to show demand, if I were an employer, I would state something along the lines of, in the past, I've actually hired 3 students from this college, and I expect to hire more in the future. So this type of endorsement really gives us an idea that even though the labor market information might be lagged, there are employers currently looking to fill positions, at least at their own company. So in the regional program recommendation process, we have not just an LMI, but we also have employer endorsement letters that we can use. All right, so finally, I want a few things for you to keep in mind. So I hear this all the time whenever I present data that's not the most positive. You know, if it's red, then I always get pushback, but I just want to let everybody know that our data is not wrong. It's just limited. This is data that's been reported to the government, as you can see from the background. So if it's been reported inaccurately, that's what's going on. But instead of asking, or instead of saying that it's wrong, let's not use it, let's ask instead, how do we find more information? I always like to use the example of buying a house. If you go buy a house, you'll study everything you can about the neighborhood, about the house itself. But when you actually buy it, you don't realize that there's plumbing issues in the house. So that means like no matter how much research you conduct, there's always going to be limited amount of information that you're operating from to make a huge decision. Same thing with labor market information. You're always going to be working on limited information, but don't let that hold you back from making a decision as a region, whether or not we want to create a new program. So that was my first point. The second one is that I want to remind everybody that we are researchers. The Center of Excellence for Labor Market Research, we study the job market. So we don't use this information for evaluative or punitive purposes at all. We want to study and know more about what's going on in the job market. So with that said, work with us. So we have a team of 3 researchers now on. I'm very excited about this because our regional consortium really supports our COE in the region. So just work with us. We'll give you the report. If the data is missing something, or if you want to talk it through, just walk it through with us, or we'll walk you through it. Our research analysts are John Edwards and Priscilla Fernandez, who I believe are on today. And you can see our emails here. They're the ones responsible for that labor market brief that we use in the program recommendation process. There you go. All right, so I'm gonna stop share because I think that was my section. And I'm gonna turn it back over to Amrita to talk about regional discussion for program intent, because that's the next step in the regional program recommendation process. But I thank you everybody for letting me share the LMI and how we use it in this process.
So thank you, Tina. Is everyone seeing my shared screen now? Okay, great. So that was awesome. Every time you present on the labor market information, I feel like I learn more and have a better refined vocabulary to talk about it, because it's complicated, but you make it seem so simple and straightforward. So we really appreciate all that you do for all of us. So we are now on the 4th stage of the regional recommendation process, which is really all about the regional discussion, right, about program intent. So before you get too far down the road, right, before you spend all of your time developing every element of your curriculum and going through all of the curriculum components and submissions and all of that, this is a space where we as a region come together and talk about what are you intending to do? What are you starting to look at? What are you starting to build? And I can't move my slides forward. Hold on. Oh, okay. So in these regional intent discussions, we really look at a number of different topics, right? And we do this at our monthly regional Dean's Council. And this is just some examples of the kinds of things we talk about, right? So the LMI, duplication, this is a really helpful way to avoid unnecessary duplication. But it's also really nice to talk about student outcomes and the kinds of things that we're hearing from employers, right? And to sort of check in on program development needs, right? So especially in CTE, when you want to develop a new program in a specific area, it often requires specialized equipment, for example. And you may want to share with your colleagues sort of your plans around that, and they may have advice like, oh, if you're interested in building this kind of lab, this is what we did at our institution, right? It can save you time, and it can also help you prepare for some of those tough questions within your own institution about, is this program the kind of program that is worth investing in, if you will. So this is just an example of the kinds of things that we try to address in these program intent discussions. So the final stage that we all really, is only what we care about, right? Did the program get recommended or not, right? So this is the final stage where the Dean's Council provides that recommendation. And in this stage, after the college gets the endorsements for the program and feels confident in the demand or the need for that program and has all those required materials ready, they submit the program components to the regional CTE website at least 2 weeks prior to the upcoming Dean's Council. And we have linked here some sort of handy dandy little reference guides for you. So the spring 21 deadlines, as well as documentation of all the past submissions and recommendations and those decisions. So all the regional submissions are done in this formal portal, and this is a state-run portal. It's not something we have control over in terms of exactly how it works and how user-friendly it is. But it's where you go and submit those programs. Oops. So these are the elements that need to be submitted into that portal. And I'm not going to read through every single one of them, but you can get a sense of the kinds of things that have to be submitted. And you'll see a lot of similarities between what the PCAW outlines is required as what in terms of what is also required for these submissions. And you can see that this is where you're submitting your LMI and your employer endorsement letters, right? So again, an opportunity to submit those in the first round, right? So if you've already gotten your LMI and you realize that it's not showing a demand, you collect those employer endorsement letters and submit them both. So as a region, all of the voting deans can look and say, okay, I see the LMI's not super strong, but look, you've got these really awesome employers saying that they need this program, and they can do that all at once instead of sort of submitting, having that discussion, and having to resubmit, right? So this is sort of the full component that ideally is submitted. So then again, I know we've talked about this before, but I feel a little bit like a broken record, but it's important because it's new and it's not so much fun. And I know there's been some resistance, but if the PCAW tells us to do it, we got to do it. And the regional consortium supports us and makes sure that there's a model to actually help us be compliant with those submissions, right? So colleges do need to submit the modified certificates. And I just wanted to clarify what a modification is, right? So it's not, tiny little tweaks to the title. It's really about changes to required courses, including electives. And this can be a little challenging to manage within your institutions. But the idea here is that these certificates are designed to go directly into an occupation. And so every required course, whether it's a required elective or a major requirement, should be focused specifically on that occupation. And so if you were to change one of them, theoretically, that could change what you're training for. And so the spirit of this requirement is that they want to make sure that that's why we submit these. That said, it can be a little cumbersome, but that is one key element to just emphasize. So at the regularly scheduled Dean's Council meetings, usually the second Friday of each month, programs for recommendation are placed on the agenda for open discussion and then vote. And the Centers of Excellence provide reviews all the submissions ahead and provides comments, some sort of a summary level comments about their analysis. And then the lead career education deans, the voting deans from each institution, have 2 weeks to review and then provide responses prior to the meeting. During the meeting itself, the voting process includes recommendations with edits, or not recommended. And all of this goes into the minutes. And then the lead career education deans are responsible for communicating back out to their institutions about what the feedback was and alternatives, next steps, those kinds of things. So that really is the 4-part processes to this regional recommendation exciting experience that we all love and cherish, right? Brings us together monthly. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, we've got another mentee.
While we're doing that, let's address some of the things in the chat. Amrita, Nicole wrote, I am submitting modifications submitting modifications is a newer requirement. Do we know when this requirement went into effect? For example, if we have program modifications that, in other words, if we have program modifications that were approved locally prior to the date, do they still have to go to the region for approval?
So the 7th edition of PCAW became sort of law in November 2019. But I will admit that most institutions didn't realize that this was a requirement till much later. And so I think the best advice is to check with your curriculum committee to see how they're working through the system. My understanding is no, you don't have to go back to the old ones to resubmit, but since the date of the PCAW, there may be some revisions that are needed, and every institution is sort of handling that review process slightly differently. Because again, often when there's a change like this, it takes a little while for an institution to update their requirements and documents and processes. And so your local curriculum process will be able to inform you sort of exactly how they're implementing these changes.
Thank you, Amrita. I'd just like to add, usually the state will start their clock ticking based upon whatever was approved in the PCAW. So I found they don't really care when we approve them locally. It's when we submit them to the state for approval. So if it was after the date, the November 19 date, which now goes back almost, well, a year and a half at least. If it has not gone through the process that Amrita just went through with us, then you have to go ahead and you do have to submit under the new guidelines of the PCAW. Otherwise, I found locally that when our technician tries to upload them, she gets a response that, where's your approval? Because they don't really care when we approved it, they only care when they're getting it. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you,
Nicole,
everyone.
you're right. You have to, from personal experience, had to resubmit everything. I don't know if you have to resubmit everything, but you certainly need the region dean's approval. That wasn't required prior, but is now. So yeah, they only care about when they change the rules, not when we figure it out.
Okay, yeah. So basically, what we're in this situation, we're, you know, I'm newer in this role, so we're kind of finding some certificates and things like that that are laying around. So we're just trying to figure out how we need to move forward. So I guess if anything after November 2019, we should just submit to the region.
Yeah.
Is what I'm hearing.
That's a good assumption. Will save you a lot of heartburn and headaches and that sort of thing. Just to do it.
And if you're modifying any programs, feel free. We started making a list of reports that we need to do for each program modification. So just submit that online form and then we'll get them to you. So feel free to just submit it early if you already know that you're going to do the program mod. Okay. All right. So it looks like folks are logged in, not as much as before, but it's okay. Let's get started. So question 7, to recap what Amrita and I were talking about. Remember to answer more quickly to get more points. So which statement is true? Please look at your phones because the wording is a little small on the screen here. But which of these is true? Employer endorsement letters can be submitted instead of LMI. Employer endorsement letters can be submitted in addition to LMI, or employer endorsement letters are not allowed. All right, everybody voted. So the correct answer is employer endorsement letters can be submitted in addition to LMI. So as Amrita mentioned, as part of the PCAW, labor market information has to be included, and the official labor market information source is the Centers of Excellence. So while we're doing the report, you can totally get employer endorsement letters for the regional program recommendation process. All right, next question. Why do we have regional discussions about program intent? A, to hear ourselves talk. B, to prevent program duplication. C, to share practices, provide insight, and improve collaboration. Or both B and C. And you can only select one. So you want to select everything you can. All right, time's up. It looks like everybody got this right. So it is both B and C. So we as a region have decided to do regional discussions about program intent to prevent that program duplication and share promising practices. All right. Sometimes it's to hear ourselves talk. Thanks, Christina. So who can submit an online LMI request to the COE? So as I mentioned, when you want to do a need statement and identify if there's a supply gap, you would have to submit an online LMI request. There's a link. Would it only be career education deans or career education deans and faculty or admin as long as the CE dean is notified? Okay, great. So the career education dean does not necessarily have to submit the LMI request. Faculty and admin can also submit it, but in the online form, we request that you notify the CE dean. All right, final question for today in terms of the quiz. Where can you find occupational codes? Remember the SOC code that I mentioned earlier. Can you find them from EDD, the Employment Development Department? Email our team, the COE, or you can look for yourself on onetonline.org. Great. Awesome. So yes, if you go to onetonline.org and you type in a keyword, you'll be able to find an SOC code related to the occupation you want to train for. So here is the leadership board again, and you can see who is in the lead. It looks like G this time won the round. Thank you very much. You're also the fastest. All right, thanks everyone. Thanks for participating in our little game today.
Thank you, Tina. Well done. And again, thank you for facilitating that. And it might be a good time to mention too, on some of those questions like the CE dean is notified, your local curriculum approval processes may have in their process how that happens. For example, at MiraCosta, there is actually a step in our curriculum at Meta process that where the faculty has to check that they've consulted with the CE dean. So the process kind of goes through me in terms of notification. And then I say, to be honest, I do the uploading myself, but I could pick a designee to do that. So I just wanted to make sure that, and I wanted to state this at the beginning, this is our presentation here today is really kind of all encompassing. It's not specific to any institution. There are 11 of us. Some of us are in multi-college districts and even have a district level approval process. So hopefully whatever you learn or bring back here today enhances what your local processes are and enhances your curriculum approval for career education. Is that a hand up from Nicole, I think?
Yeah, sorry. So to clarify again, so the faculty can submit those LMI requests. I heard Tina mention that there is a question in there about the CE dean. Does that mean that the request is sending a notification to the dean, or is that just a question like, did you notify your CE dean?
It's the latter. So we just want to make sure that all the CE deans are aware of all of the LMI requests coming from their college, again, for that regional program discussion for intent. Because if a faculty member or an admin is submitting a request on behalf of your college, but you have no idea when the program actually comes for the regional recommendation process, it might be the first time you've seen or heard of it. So we try to add that in our process to make sure that you're just up to date on what's going on.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. And I will say those discussions are very robust, supporting, and very much, as region deans, very collaborative to ensure that we are serving our students in the best possible way for career education in our region. So I know we have practically every college represented here today, and I can honestly say you're in great hands with all of your CE deans who are designated by the college president. I don't know if you knew that, but if the CE deans are appointed, and certainly all of those who are participating today in our region staff, you are in, and COE, everyone involved, you're in great hands. So when your curriculum goes to the state, you can be assured that it has been vetted and it's going to really be work in the best interest of our students. So kudos to all of us here today. Thank you. And thank you all again for hanging in there with us this morning. And so far, we've heard about mostly the curriculum development and approval process within our region, along with what drives your local curriculum approval process. Again, I'll just reiterate that our presentation here this morning is not about local approval processes, as that's governed by your local governing boards through your curriculum committee, which of course, as we know now, because of AB 1725, is part of shared governance. My part of the presentation this morning is going to relate to somewhat the approval process, but also how we ensure that our local industry and businesses are participating in what it is that we actually offer by informing our curriculum. So let's start off by just a little overview of what I'll cover in this part of the presentation. A little bit of background, as always. Of course, we have to include the legal requirements. If nothing else, we want to be legal. I always tell my faculty and staff, if nothing else, let's be legal, and hopefully beyond that, but that's the bare minimum. The role and purpose of career education advisory committees, and then some things to consider. And all of what I am presenting here today is kind of a compilation of many years of being a career education dean. I was in other states as well, been in California since 1998. I was at San Diego Mesa College then I was at Cuyamaca College from about 2001 to 07, and Mira Costa College since. So I've compiled a lot of kind of tidbits, tricks of the trade, if you will, little bits of advice here and there on how to oversee advisory committees, which, granted, a little bit more complex now given the environment working with within our economy and working with businesses that are also remote. Again, I'll take a piece out of Amrita's presentation, and that is I'm not going to read all of these for you, but as you can see on this slide, there are legal requirements related to having CE advisory boards, and Title V, Section 55601 statement there reminds us that our governing boards for all of our community college districts require that we have or that we appoint vocational advisory committees. Now, the Title V says they do the appointing, but the reality of it is, and I'm sure every college may be different, I work with our faculty in career education and those that require advisory boards to ensure that we do indeed have advisory boards and that they're meeting at least once a year. What we do at my institution is, what we did before the pandemic, we used to set a date in April. We'd have a big breakfast in the morning for our advisory boards, and then we would have breakout sessions all across the campus in the various rooms. We used to hold it on Fridays when there was less activity on campus. Now, of course, we're leaving it to our faculty. Mostly it's our department chairs or program directors to hold those advisory boards virtually, those meetings virtually. And as you can see that the California Education Code in Part 2, Section 8070, basically describes what the purposes are of the advisory boards in career education. They're only required in career education. Advisory boards are not required for the liberal arts or general education curriculum. So again, you can read through that. And as I said, when we started the presentation today, all of this entire slide deck is actually going to be a very good reference tool for you. So now I broke out here really what the purposes are of CE advisory boards, or at Mira Costa we call them advisory committees. Both terms are used and they're interchangeable. What they're comprised of usually and should be are local employers and members of the community who advise us. We're the educators, of course, the faculty, the administration, and all those involved with approving curriculum in our institutions, and then certainly on the regional level, to design, develop, operate, evaluate, and revise our programs. Now, these are required. These meetings are required, and the minutes of any meetings where you have curriculum approved by the advisory boards must be uploaded to the chancellor's office when you have new or modified curriculum being submitted. So in what I always tell faculty is that anticipate any curriculum revisions that you may be looking at in the upcoming year, or that you have gotten information from your advisory boards, and make sure they're on an advisory board meeting agenda. And you discuss them as you normally would with your advisory board, and make sure they're part of the minutes, because the minutes have to be uploaded. On rare occasion, we've had situations where something's come up where we have to do it quickly for some reason, and we can always do votes by email. Of course, now it's a little easier with Zoom in existence and every college having it. If necessary, we can hold what I would call an off-cycle meeting. In other words, not holding it when you normally did, but hold a special meeting if you need curriculum to be improved. And really, the third bullet point there really reminds us that the advisory boards ensure that everything that we do in terms of career education reflect the current needs of the workplace. And that's really what the bulk of this presentation has been about today, and that is providing career education that meets the needs of those who employ our students upon graduation or completion of certificates. I'm going to just take a quick look at chat. Well, actually, I can't look at the chat at the same time. Oh, yes. Someone said the board delegates it to the administration and faculty. That is usually the case. The boards are not going to necessarily get involved with appointing members. So thank you for that. Okay, continuing with the role of our advisory committees. Remember, they are advisory because of what we learned about AB 1725 earlier and what Amrita presented there, and in relation to the PCA. The advice they provide certainly can be accepted or rejected based upon a variety of factors that are available to whoever's developing the curriculum, any other resources you have, laws, regulations, LMI data. I can just give you an example. I have a horticulture program at MiraCosta, and every time I go to an advisory board meeting, everybody in the room will have, all of the employers will have a need to fill. Like they say, you need an entire degree on tree pruning. I'm like, well, okay, because they need a few tree pruners. So what I always say is, well, how many people are you going to hire per year for your business to actually do that kind of work? Sometimes I hear crickets, sometimes I'll hear a few, but that's why we look at them as being advisory in nature, because obviously we don't customize curriculum for each individual employer. So the advice we get from our advisory boards or committees, coupled with what we get for LMI data and any of the other factors that are available to us to use or research or review, will come into play, and it's all part of the curriculum approval process. Just remember, they don't have any administrative or policy forming authority. They are merely advisory. So the most authority they have is that we have to have the minutes of their approval included when we upload a new or modified curriculum to the Chancellor's office. Okay, again, I'm getting in the habit of checking chat once in a while. Okay, just a couple of, oh, Jennifer asked, do advisory committee minutes need to be uploaded for modifications too? I say yes. I'll defer to Amrita if she has a better answer, but I always do. I've made a habit of with our faculty of saying, make sure your advisory committee approves anything, regardless of what it is. And so I've never had that issue, but I always err on the side of yes.
Yeah, I think that's the best advice. I get the impression that each local sort of process kind of guides, slightly differently than, there's not a lot of consistency there, but our understanding is that that's the best way to provide the evidence, is
Yes.
to have those full minutes rather than any other kind of summary.
Thank you, Amrita. I agree, and it's a good habit to get into because of what the role of advisory committees and what they're supposed to be providing to us, and in terms of informing our curriculum. Okay, thank you. All right, let's take a look at the specific roles of the members of advisory committees just quickly here. Again, I have them broken down into a few different categories, starting with industry. There's a lot of bullet points here, and obviously I won't read them all to you, but here's where you might be working with them to get your industry support letters. For example, earlier in the presentation, you heard Tina speaking to LMI and perhaps industry support letters. Well, I can remember, just to give you an example, years ago, we used to have a program at MiraCosta that prepared technicians for the San Onofre nuclear generating station. We called it, affectionately, was known as SONGS. We developed that curriculum back then. We're talking about perhaps now, oh my goodness, probably 8, 9 years ago. But we actually submitted all with letters because there was really no labor market data. They were the only employers for this particular type of work. Since then, as you know, there is no more SONGS that's doing any hiring. So we actually eliminated the program. Now so to get the program, we actually had to have the letters. We did couple it with LMI, but even though the LMI, we really couldn't provide any local data for. Nationally, yes, but not locally. So I think when you're working with your advisory boards, this is a nice bullet point list of what the expectations should be when working with your advisory boards or committee members. I always like to, as the administrator, I attend as many as I can. Sometimes they're on the same night or day, and I can't attend them all, or I'll attend part of them. But I'll also be encouraging with our advisory boards too, as they're providing us with what it is that we ask them to do, to work with us on internships, perhaps providing jobs for our students, besides doing all of the things that are required from an education code or from a legal standpoint. Somebody asked, can recordings suffice? I'm assuming that means for advisory board minutes. That I don't know, because I wouldn't know how to upload it. I think we would probably cause some consternation at the chancellor's office if we uploaded a recording, because they've never seen one. But that's a good question. I don't know. Since you probably are recording them in Zoom, maybe the transcript would be okay. I know in Zoom you can get transcripts, or you can download the chat or upload the chat. So perhaps the vote is taken through the chat function or voting function in Zoom, and that will suffice. Not sure about audio recordings though. All right, students are also can be and should be part of advisory boards, as I mentioned earlier. So from a student standpoint, when it comes to advisory boards, really what we're doing, or hopefully going to result in some of the things I already mentioned in terms of getting skills or developing skills to help them move into the paid working place. So it's real work experience, like internships, perhaps providing information interviews, job shadowing, project-based learning, all of those things that we're very, very familiar with, especially now in terms of preparing our students for the workplace. I know that a lot of you have career centers and career services who will offer these functions. However, they also need a way to connect to the businesses that will provide those opportunities for our students. And a lot of that happens through our advisory boards on behalf of our students. Student mentoring is also possible. I don't know, I can't recall us doing a lot of that, but it could be very, very important to certain types of jobs and certain students, depending on their chosen occupation or career path. So again, these are some of the things that the advisory board can provide on behalf of students. And of course, students are sometimes our best marketing tool. If they complete our programs and they get jobs as a result, and they're doing well in their chosen careers, I know we do, certainly at MiraCosta, we try to capture all of that information as much as possible, provide it to our PIO who works with us in terms of getting it out through their means, through social media, but also the region does a great job. And this is not a strong workforce meeting, but we also do have many opportunities to get that word out by way of our student successes. To me, I'll just editorial comment, the best salespeople we have are our students. If we can capture what they have done to be successful and can somehow get that word out to potential students or others who are considering education with us, that's the best promotion we have. And of course, most of us do career and job fairs as well. Now they're virtual. I remember at one time when, not that long ago, they were on campus. We've done, at least at MiraCosta, we figured out a way to do all of those virtually. and hopefully you have as well in working with your advisory boards, who for the most part participate in those as well. So there's a little bit about students. And now breaking down to a little bit more specifics on what they can do or should do for us and with us in terms of curriculum and facilities and equipment. As mentioned earlier, they're advisory, so they assist in establishing curriculum and programs that are relevant to our workforce. They do help us to evaluate program and effectiveness because they are part of those meetings, the advisory committee meetings or advisory board meetings. And a lot of what you see here on this screen could or should be agenda items on those meetings. I know actually not what I do, but I think Ben Gambo is also in this meeting, or before him, Jenya. What we do is we provide templates for our faculty with questions that they can easily bring to their advisory board meetings. And what they do is just fill that out, and we keep record of it so that when it does come time for informing decisions related to curriculum or facilities, we have those. And we find that if we provide the templates, it's a lot easier to keep track of. We also, at least at MiraCosta, we require individuals, if you're, for example, applying for Perkins funding or strong workforce funding, that also has to be informed by having participation through your advisory boards. In other words, if you're non-compliant, then you won't be eligible, because we also want to make sure that we're following from top to bottom the requirements for our funding. And it's really about keeping our programs relevant. So a lot of times the meetings will involve curriculum review, and rather than presenting the curriculum or the faculty presenting to industry, usually they provide the catalog or the template or the goals or the mission, and that's the points of discussion in the advisory board meetings. Similarly, with facilities and equipment, they certainly can make recommendations, and usually those meetings, they have lots of recommendations regarding equipment and facilities. But also the reason why you want to probably include those in your agenda, or they want to include them in the agendas, or if you're attending, is so that you can inform things or funding like Perkins or strong workforce. There's data or information to back that up, that either our equipment is antiquated, not relevant, needs to be updated, upgraded, what have you. They can donate. I just got a request today, as a matter of fact. SDG&E wants to donate something to MiraCosta. I don't know what it is. I'll admit, a lot of times I get people who want to donate, and they're donating things we don't necessarily want because they want to get rid of it. But we've been very successful with automobile donations. For example, for our automotive program, our faculty works with our advisory boards, particularly Nissan, who we're closely affiliated with. So that can be a very substantial part of how they help us in our programs to offer students what they need to get through their career paths. And as I mentioned, helping us or helping to inform what we do with our facilities and equipment that keeps our programs relevant. So we certainly don't want to be, if we can avoid it, have students being prepared in the facilities or with equipment that isn't going to be relevant when they actually get a job. So both of those areas, curriculum and facilities equipment, should be big parts of the aspects of working with advisory boards. All right, some things to consider when developing and nurturing, I call it nurturing advisory boards. Who's going to chair the meetings? Usually it's a faculty member, usually the department chair or program director, but usually with committees, the committee decides who the chair is, so that could actually, that's up to the committee. How big it is. Some of mine are very large, some are very small. Nursing tends to be very large, and they do a combined advisory board with Palomar, which is great because we're both in North County, so that's another approach to take, so especially considering the clinical placement challenges that we have. Recruiting members, usually I'll leave that to the faculty because they're most closely related. And actually all of this is left to the faculty with my support, but they're more closely related to our industry partners. Once per year is required. I remember back in the day when twice per year was required. We usually met in this fall and the spring, but that's been a long time since. Some of our advisory boards, I think in biotech, for some reason meets twice. I don't know, it's because of an accreditation that they have, or for whatever the reason. You can meet more than once. The one thing I always remind faculty of is be considerate of our industry partners. We don't want to overburden them. For example, today, a lot happening today. Today, I got a request to share contact information for a couple of my advisory boards. And I always get a little bit concerned about that because I don't want to just share contact information so that those individuals can be solicited, unless we know it's really going to be of benefit to the program and to the college as a whole, because we, again, worry about overburdening our partners that serve on advisory boards. Meeting logistics, well, that's easy. We're all in Zoom now, but I suppose there'll be that moving forward or some combination of both. And the one thing that I find lacks most is communicating between meetings. We tend to rely on that one meeting a year to get all of the business done, but that doesn't have to be the case. That can be the formal meeting, but as I mentioned earlier, the communications could and should go on all year long so that your advisory boards can help to inform decision-making on everything from curriculum to strong workforce proposals, Perkins proposals, other types of issues related to how we manage our curriculum. Whoops. Maybe I'll just pause for a moment there and see if anyone has any lingering questions about advisory boards. I went through that quickly, but one thing I would advise you to about this is sometimes your districts or colleges have board policies related to advisory boards. You want to make sure that you're following those, obviously. This is just, I'm speaking in general terms. At MiraCosta, we do have a board policy and administrative procedure for biennial program reviews, but not for advisory boards. They pretty much leave that to me. It's in my job description to oversee it as a designated career education dean, but really the advisory board piece is left to our curriculum approval process. It's written in as one of those requirements to upload career education curriculum along with the career education dean's approval. I don't see anything in the chat or hands raised. So let's move on to the biennial career education program review. I guess we're calling it biennial. For years, I've been calling it biannual incorrectly, according to my esteemed colleague, Tina Nobartel. But so I'm going to correct that in the future, but not till after my July presentation to the board, because I've already got it done. So starting with the next biennial review, sorry, MiraCosta will call it the right name. But it is biennial because I understand that means every other year, whereas biannual means twice per year. So for 20 some years, I've been calling it the wrong thing. Anyway, for this part of the presentation, I'll review with you the same thing, the regulatory requirements for Ed Code, and I'm actually going to show you an example of MiraCosta's administrative procedure, which for our number is 4102. And then to explain, because I certainly could go into the regulatory requirements in detail, I'm just going to show you what I've been doing for years at MiraCosta that was kind of born out of some work I did even as far back as when I was a dean at Mesa College. And I think because I'm known to follow the rules, you'll find that what's been presented is kind of a creative way of doing that. And hopefully it helps if you're struggling with your compliance with biennial program reviews. All right, according to Education Code Section 78016, and again, they haven't never changed the language. It still says every vocational or occupational training program instead of career education program, but we'll live with it, by our colleges has to be reviewed every 2 years. Now, this is where it gets a little sticky, by the governing board of the district to ensure that, as demonstrated by there's not even this thing, California Occupational Information System. I'm not even sure I know what that is anymore. And including our cooperative labor market information, we kind of translate that now to our LMI. That's provided by our Center of Excellence, our local research departments, et cetera, and the unemployment insurance code. To be honest with you, I'm not sure I've ever looked at the unemployment insurance code to do any biennial program reviews. But anyway, we use LMI data. I think it's safe to say, based upon how we do our biennial program reviews, we're blessed to have a Center of Excellence. Every region in the state has a Center of Excellence. We just happen to have the best one in the state to work with. So I will depend as the career ed dean who's charged with this on our Center of Excellence data. And usually what happens is our local research office will help me to come up with making it presentable to our governing board. So what we do, or what we're required to do, is document labor market demand, that's your LMI, does not represent unnecessary duplication with other training programs in the region. Now here, we fortunately have that covered through our regional approval process, because part of the aspects of bringing curriculum to our region deans for discussion is using the LMI data that Tina went over is so we don't duplicate. In other words, if being so close to Palomar College, if the labor market gaps are small and MiraCosta decides to offer a program that's similar to Palomar's that has that small labor market gap, well, that should be identified well before any biennial program review. I mean, if I get to this point and I'm identifying that as a problem, well, that's shame on me and working with our faculty and our region, because it shouldn't get to that point. So, and then the third bullet point here that the board is supposed to approve is a demonstrated effectiveness measured by employment and completion success of students. So those 3 points are what I'm charged with, at least at MiraCosta, with presenting to our Board of Trustees every 2 years. Ours is in the odd year, so this spring is when I will present, and I know Ben is still online. Ben, guess what? You're gonna be able to present with me this year, so congratulations on that. But it's mostly the work has been done in terms of the presentation aspect, and we're pretty much rooted in how we do it. But the governing board, we do the presentation, and most of you probably do it the same way. Someone does a presentation to your board for biennial program reviews. Basically, they're validating what's presented. They're not, at least our board, is not going to be doing this work on their own, and they're also not going to be making decisions related to program elimination, for example. Because even if the labor market information is weak, really, that'll be identified in the report casually with the board. But really what they're doing is entrusting that the curriculum approval process and the designated career ed dean is ensuring that that isn't the case going forward. So they pretty much trust based upon what's being presented. And I think that'll, the best way to illustrate that will be with how I actually go about doing it, which is probably very similar. But again, I follow what our governing board is looking for. Now, the only thing, and I kind of alluded to this a couple of minutes ago, that the board also has the responsibility for, is that any program that doesn't meet the requirements of that subdivision and the standards promulgated by the governing board shall be terminated within 1 year. Well, the governing board isn't going to terminate curriculum, because really that's faculty purview. And most of you should also have a board policy, because it's an accreditation requirement, on program discontinuance. So most of the college's program discontinuance policies, and they're usually board policies or administrative procedures, have some kind of year or more of review and chance to improve, for lack of a better way of describing it, so that depending upon your college's policy for program discontinuance, you'll go through a review process and decide whether or not that program should be continued. But the faculty, by us, I mean faculty. And then, of course, we facilitate that. I'll just give you an example, because I have had a few over the years. Most recent one was surgical technology. MiraCosta College discontinued it in the last year for a variety of reasons, but we followed the policy, which was local policy, which was a task force to review the viability of surgical tech. The results came out to be not to continue it, so we didn't, and gave Southwestern College our blessing to continue their program and to expand it if they so desired. So that's a different policy, but I just want to bring that up because a board, I can't think of a board who's going to vote in a meeting to discontinue a program. It's just not going to happen. So, and you notice this has been around for a while because this section has been in application since July of 1983. Now, E says a written summary of findings must be available to the public. So what I do to cover that is what I'm going to present to you now, we keep electronically now, but also being old school, I will also have a binder of this available in my office so that if for some odd reason, and it hasn't happened in 30 plus years, someone from the public comes in and asks for our biennial program reviews, they're available. But for the most part, they're electronic now. We could just send them to individuals. But we do once a year present to the board. It's an agenda item for information to our board. And then there's a record in the minutes that we have indeed gone ahead and done our due diligence for that particular year. Okay, but again, I would say my best advice here is to work with your local board policies and administrative procedures. Now, as I mentioned, I think that one of the easier ways for me to always demonstrate is by example. So what you see on your screen now is the current MiraCosta College administrative procedure related to this in career education. So this is a career education administrative procedure that we have. This covers our advisory boards and our biennial program reviews. So I guess I'm going to have to change this to biennial. Thank you, Tina. Again, I'm going to thank you for the next year as I work through all these changes. But A relates to advisory boards, and this is where they give the faculty the purview to actually create their advisory boards to serve on our to serve as advisory committees. And they must meet at least once a year. The rosters, agendas, and meeting minutes are kept by my office. And perhaps now, since we've had an associate dean for a number of years, that role being Ben Gamboa now, we actually will keep both. My assistant, Daria, will actually keep all of these because I'm more with the compliance aspects of it. And Ben, as the associate dean, is more in the facilitation aspects of it. But the board, for as far as official records, I'll always have them available electronically or paper, depending upon the circumstance. And then B addresses the biannual program reviews. They are completed for all career education programs. They do, as you'll see here in a moment, in my own way and working with faculty, document the viability of the programs. Now, this says the statistics provided by the Chancellor's Office are used to determine labor market. That's a very loose term because, again, it really depends on when we're doing this. Now it's our Center of Excellence and our local research office. But so it's not really the Chancellor's Office providing this, but some of you might remember in the old days, they did. We used to use data that was, if we were lucky, it was 5 years old to get our, to use for our curriculum. So I haven't figured out a way to maybe change this administrative procedure, but I'll keep toying with it. I like to keep things vague or open, maybe not vague is not the good word, so that we don't have to constantly change APs or BPs, because those are a lot more complicated to change, at least at MiraCosta, because of the governance processes they have to go through. So anyway, those are the highlights of our AP, and I just wanted to mention that because they're really, that's my charge to oversee Administrative Procedure 4102. And to ensure that we're compliant. And then you can see at the very, very bottom, of course, the buck really stops with the Chief Instructional Officer that ensures that the district meets these reporting requirements. So if I don't do it, they'll probably remember that I haven't, but all of our board docket items go through the VP of Instruction anyway. So, and her assistant has a tickler of what's coming up. So even if I forgot for some reason, they would remind me. So you can see it's a very small, it's not a big document. It's just an AP, administrative procedure for our board. That's how it's handled at MiraCosta. And I only offer that up as an example and remind you to check yours to see what you have for an AP or a BP. And what I've done here is tried to couple our process at MiraCosta, or what I have done for years, for our biennial CTE review process with what you've already learned here today. Now, it says here the Dean of Career Ed compiles, reviews, and does all of this stuff with the LMI data for each CE TOPS code. And that's true. I do that, but not without the massive help of many, including our COE when we need it. We really have a great local research office that helps me to compile that as well. And so what I do is I take that information, and fortunately, since I've been doing it for so long, it's really updating from the previous reviews. I'm not starting from scratch unless we have a new program that has to be included. So I review them all and the enrollment data. Then based upon the LMI and the enrollment data, I complete what I call a CE 2-year review form. That'll be on the next slide. I actually complete the form myself with notes and send it to all of our faculty in career education. And I ask them to meet with me if they'd like, send me email comments, edit suggestions, or whatever. And then we do the step 4, which is negotiate the biennial review results. In other words, through our discussions, we come to a conclusion together as to what the results of the review should be, and that's what becomes part of the record, which actually becomes part of the presentation I make to the board. And to ensure that we are compliant, the program lead or chair, some of you might call them directors, we have department chairs and we have some directors, they just sign off on it, just indicating that they're in agreement with it. And I sign off on it, and that becomes part of our record, that their particular program did indeed go through the process of biannual program review. Now, one other thing that is on top of this that you may or may not have at your college, because we like to have our processes inform program review, which is a different process at most colleges, and it also, the process belongs to faculty, according to AB 1725. But from a program review standpoint, every 2 years, I also am required to send a report to our curriculum committee and to our institutional program review committee that identifies any programs that have under one completer over a 3-year period. Now, I know that's very liberal, and it is, but I'm always surprised by how many programs we have that haven't had at least one completer in 3 years. And what our internal process requires is that I have to submit, with the blessing of the chair or the director, an action plan for how we're going to improve the completers for that program. Because the institutional program review and curriculum committee, from an informational standpoint, wants to know that going in, because obviously program reviews, usually it's tied to resources, and that committee wants to ensure that the resources are going into the right places in terms of support of students. And from a curriculum committee standpoint, again, we don't look at them as as needing resources, but anytime we approve new curriculum, there may be a cost that comes with it. Even just the sheer fact of teaching new courses comes with a cost. It doesn't even have to be equipment or facilities. But that's kind of an aside in our local process, but it's kind of how we work to integrate program review with curriculum development, with all of these other outside requirements. And my little editorial here is, in career education, we are held to a much higher level of accountability than any other programs at our colleges. A general education and other programs do not undergo the scrutiny that we do to develop curriculum, to maintain curriculum, and certainly, I always say, prove our worth within the community and within our colleges. I think it works in the best interest of our students. It's laborious, it takes a lot of work, but it helps us to be confident that we are indeed offering what we should be to our communities and our students. So that's how it happens at MiraCosta, but it's in general terms, if you looked at what you do, it's probably very similar. Now I'm going to show you the form I use, but just in general, here's what goes into a biannual or biennial program review. And I think it probably goes into most, if you look back at actually how you do it. We always include a review of the purpose of the program, the demand, the quality, any external issues such as licensing, like nursing, a lot of licensing, Board of Registered Nursing issues that have really nothing to do with what might be true for horticulture. And then we take a look at a review of the 2-year plan. Since these are biannual reviews, we want to make sure that we're set up for the next 2 years before I have to go through this exercise with everybody again. Now here's the form. This is just to give you an idea of the form I used. And I have shared this process with some of my colleagues in the region. So those of you deans or associate deans that are present here today, if you'd like at any time for me to share processes or forms or anything just to look at, or if you want to use it, it's great. I think I've even sent my PowerPoints that I use for my board presentation to some. So feel free, or faculty, whoever wants them. I'm more than willing to share, just email me. But you can see I use kind of a very broad scale for each of those areas I just mentioned. And what we do is, and this is a PDF, so I would normally have something that's fillable. And we would, or I would, based upon data and enrollment, fill out the scale, put in any comments that are related, and send these to each individual program director or chair who's identified at the top. So I would just type in the program, send it to whoever's responsible for that program in terms of faculty. They take a look at it along with the data, and then they communicate with me. Eventually, there's a final version of this form that gets signed. Whoops, I couldn't find their, I couldn't make the slide big enough to include where their signature goes without squeezing it out, but it would be below mine or above mine somewhere. And this just becomes a nice, neat record, you know, for us to have that's kept in my office. I don't share with these with the Board of Trustees, however. I'll show you what I do share with the board in a moment. These are for our records. I share only with the board, hopefully no board members present. They get, they get the very general presentation and overview of career education at MiraCosta College. And they can, of course, ask me questions. But I don't, and I make it very clear when I work with faculty, whatever we discuss is for program improvement or program success. It's not being presented to anybody for the purpose of being critical or otherwise. The goal is to make the programs successful. Anytime we've deactivated a program, it's always been informed by data, and it's always been because it's gone through the appropriate processes within our policies and procedures. So that's what I do anyway. Oh, somehow we're getting a little different way to transitioning, but that's good. Now, here's what I will share with the Board of Trustees. This is just a sample. We have one of these for every single program, career education program at MiraCosta. And this is really put together by our research office, who I'm sure works closely with our Center of Excellence. So it's a compilation of both parties working together. And I'm just truly blessed to be able to just say we need an update on these, and I get them every 2 years. But you can see we indicate the top code, and they're using Burning Glass. I don't look at Burning Glass myself. Our research office does, and EMSI. So what happens is they list the program and then all of the variety of criteria that is available to include in the program review. I have a packet I prepare for the board, our board, that has a page for every single one of our program tops codes. So as part of my presentation with the board, they will get this for every program available. I do a PowerPoint presentation for them that includes this as a sample, but I let them know now it's a PDF because we're doing everything remote. In the PDF they get is a packet of every single program. And usually by the end, I always will say, if they don't have any questions then, they can always ask me questions, but always remind them not to communicate with me directly. Being a good administrator, I know we don't communicate directly with board members, so I remind them, go through the president, and I'll be happy to, or vice president of instruction, and I'm always happy to respond if they don't want to ask questions right then and there. But they're very receptive of this type of information, and so are our faculty. And actually, I shouldn't say this is just for the board. We share this with our advisory boards. We share this with students if they want to see it, our counselors at MiraCosta. Everybody loves these types of templates or presentations because it's a quick reference tool for them. And you notice not only is it about accounting, but off to the left, we have all of the occupations listed that we've at least matched to what a student could do with our, when they complete a program of studies at MiraCosta, all the way to the far right, which talks about or presents what do you really need from an education and prep standpoint, which sometimes is, you need to be a CPA. Well, that's great. They come to us, get a 2-year degree in accounting, move on to a 4-year degree and become a CPA. It's still part of what we do. And one of the things I always remind our board of when when I do these presentations is that career education isn't always just short-term training or 2-year degrees. A lot of career education programs are geared more for prep for major, for 4-year degrees, like there's some business degrees, accounting degrees, perhaps some others. All right, so that's something that I share. And then I also have this packet that or this is a representation of a packet. I only use the counting because it's first alphabetically. But here, it's broken down more into a form that might be better for students. In other words, we have these flyers, like I can remember, in the building where I'm housed at MiraCosta, we have one of these for every program. It's sort of like one of those, I don't know what you call them, a display with flyers in it. We have all of these. They're also linked to the business and technology career pathway that we have linked on our website. And all of us, I happen to be the dean who serves on the business and technology career pathway team. So we have all of these also available there. And so it's just a very simple one-pager that speaks in generalities to the variety of jobs and programs of study that one might be able to pursue regarding accounting. But as I said, we have all of these for each of our programs. I also share this with the board as part of our biannual program review. But again, I just showing you this. You probably have a process that works well. I just am doing this again because I find it easier for me to explain how I present to the board so that we don't get stuck in minutia. The one thing I really avoid with working with board members or sometimes VPs or presidents is getting stuck in the minutia of the numbers, because then they start to look at, well, why didn't this one student not complete the program in 2 years or something like that, when in the grand scheme of things, it might be very irrelevant to the big picture. Boards are policy makers. Then the president and the VPs actually are set our directives regarding operations based upon those policies. Whoops, let me go back one page. I know that says thank you right there. But before I go to the thank you page, I will say that besides presenting to our board, I also, because at least at our college, the president also likes an annual presentation on strong workforce. Biannual. So what I've done, biennial. What I've done is coupled that with our biennial program review. So one of the things that we do, or I will do with Ben at MiraCosta, is include 2 parts to the presentation. One will be the biennial program review, and the other will be our compliance with strong workforce metrics for MiraCosta and what we've set over time. So that we kind of do 2 things every 2 years to get them, I don't want to say out of the way, but it's much more efficient that way. And there's a lot of linkages we can make between the 2. So I guess I would leave you with, from a biennial program review standpoint, is follow your board policy or administrative procedure. It might be a good time to dust off what that is, like I just did, and said maybe we need some wording changes in there. But I'm blessed at MiraCosta to really have the board who relies on me or whoever the career education dean is to get this stuff done. They're not prescriptive and they're not micromanaging in that regard. And that's always great. And neither is our president and neither is our vice president. I guess probably because things seem to go okay. What we all know, we'll always hear when things aren't going okay. So I just assume they are until I hear otherwise. And I can't speak for your institutions, but I can really say at MiraCosta that I'm blessed to not have the micromanagement. I'm the CE dean. They entrust me with all of what we've discussed here today. And so does our curriculum committee. Actually, I was the dean. We have one dean who serves on the curriculum committee, and it's a non-voting. It used to be voting, but it's non-voting besides the VP. I served for about 14 years. I just now am off. And actually, Mike Fino, and some of you might know, he's the dean of math and science at MiraCosta, now serves, but he has biotech as part of the biology department. So that's that. So I guess I can go to the thank you slide at this point. And I think that's the end of our presentation, right? But I would like to, since we have some time, open it up to any questions or comments. Some of the stuff we went through quickly, but as we've mentioned, the presentation itself will be available along with the slide deck. That will be posted. Molly will send us out exactly where they are once they get posted. We do hope that you'll share what you learned here today and the slide deck or anything else, and that you use those of us who presented as resources or your colleagues as resources. We are more than happy to assist. Although we are separate institutions, we can be competitive at times, especially when it comes to students, but in the end, we're a region, and it's all about the success of our region because it's about the success of our students. We all share the students and communities of our region. So I can honestly say, I use the term blessed a lot today, but I truly am. I've been in the region, since 1998. There's never a time I felt like anyone I worked with did not have the best interest of our students and communities in mind. And I'm proud of that, and it continues. How we do it changes over time, but that's never changed. So with that, I'll open it up with questions or comments if anyone would like to.
This was just really, really great and very informational and very helpful. Thank you. I'm so glad I attended.
Well, thank you. Spread the good word. And whatever we shared here today, I'm glad that you got a lot from it and appreciate the kind words. Thank you very much.